All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
And we have a guest today, Gio from the SwitchRPG website, YouTube channel /podcast. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Doing good.
PG.
Yep.
PG.
So we wanted to have Gio to come on today because we wanted to get another voice in here to talk about our favorite RPGs of 2020. And since you are from the SwitchRPG podcast and other media places, we figured you would be a good place to a good person to come on and join the conversation. But before we jump into what is our favorite RPG of 2020 and all the various runner-ups, we want to first give you an opportunity to talk about where you come from, so that way others listening and viewing can know where to find you. I mean, this isn't your first time on here, but it's possible there might be some new viewership that hasn't seen you before. So
yeah,
where are you from?
My name is Gio. I'm from SwitchRPG.com. I also am the content creator for the YouTube channel, as well as the co-host for the podcast, SwitchRPG Podcast. Again, all things Nintendo Switch RPGs. Like, yeah, we cover it all there.
Very cool.
Very nice.
Cool. Definitely go check that out. They put out a lot more content than we do. Obviously, I think you've got more people,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, and we just got two more people, so
very cool.
we're like forever growing. It's great.
Yeah, let's definitely go check that out. It's a lot of fun over there. All right, gents. We're talking about our favorite RPG of 2020. So I want to stress here to those listening and watching, this is our favorite, not necessarily the best, but this is going to be our favorite. But we are going to talk about why the game is our favorite. If it's a game that I didn't think was my favorite for the year, I'm going to tell you why. So it might get a little dicey here a little bit. I might be criticizing something that's your favorite, but it should be a pretty good conversation. But we're going to talk about our favorite RPG, and then afterwards we'll talk about our runner-up, or wherever that feels appropriate to talk about that. And then afterwards we'll kind of touch base on some other RPGs that came out this year that made a big splash, but maybe for one reason or another didn't quite hit our favorite spot. So to start us off, Gio, since you just recorded your podcast already on the SwitchRPG YouTube page for your favorite RPG of 2020, I thought it'd be a good place to start off with you and kind of get that out there. What is your favorite RPG of 2020?
Yeah, sure. And actually, it was kind of the consensus for the website. We did run the same sort of thing, what we did our awards type of thing, and for
Okay.
the Switch RPG, it was Hades. Hades is a roguelike RPG done by Supergiant Games. If you're at all familiar with them, they did Bastion, they did Transistor, Pyre. They've done quite a number of games,
Good
and
stuff.
just like all their games, their voice acting is phenomenal. Their art design is top notch. They do a really good job there. The only thing is that this one's a little bit different. It is a roguelike, so they've done something a little bit different. The replayability is fairly good. So even when you go through a run and you fail, the narrative continues to get pushed, similar to what like the most recent version I can think of is Children of Morta. They did the same thing. So the narrative keeps getting pushed, and it feels like I must have died a million times in that game, and it felt like there was no repeated dialogue in the game.
Yeah.
And there's just so much customization in the game. There's so many different. I want to say there's maybe 7 or 8 different weapon types, and they
Right.
all function so very different.
And you're playing
but
it, and you played it on the Switch, correct?
Yeah, I played it on the Switch and primarily in handheld. This was a game that I couldn't really sit down to like in front of a TV to play.
Right.
Primarily played it in handheld, and it runs like fantastic. I don't even know if there were any updates to the game. It just ran well right out of the gate. I think the only update was for, I think it's cross save, or not cross play, but cross save for, I think it's Steam and maybe GOG or something like
Okay.
that. But it runs
It runs
fantastic.
great.
Yeah, it really does.
See that
Have you gotten to play that at all?
that was the main thing that I was concerned about because initially I was aware of the game. It came on my radar on PC, and I know that a lot of people were talking about this game at that point in time just on PC. That hey, this is a really good game, and I was wanting to check it out at that point. But it naturally it looks like a game that you would want to play on the Switch because it's kind of got that it's a very artistic flair to it and just that 2D action, but still very flashy and pleasant on the eyes. And it just looks like something that you would want to play on the Switch. So I was waiting for that version, and then it came out, and I actually heard one review where somebody said maybe they got like a early version of it or something, but they said it runs pretty good, but there are some spots where it dipped a little bit. And I don't know, in my mind, I thought, nope, I'm gonna wait.
Well, see, here's the thing though, like frame rate, unless it's very, very bad to the point where it's literally just stops. Frame rate really doesn't bother me, and I might be in the minority there. Like I played
Right.
Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on the Switch, and the frame rate on that is absolutely horrible. But that's probably one of my most favorite games for or on the Switch, to be
Mhm.
honest with you. So I mean, when it comes to frame rate, I'm not much of a frame rate snob, but I can see how it can bother some people. It just doesn't really bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same actually. It's only if it's like if the frame rate is like consistently below 20,
Yeah.
then it's kind of like ugh, like
Yeah.
this is kind of a drag. But if it's like 25 to 30 most of the time and then like occasionally dips, like if there's like a lot of action on screen or something, then I can usually look past it. It's only
Sure.
if it's consistently slow for
It
me
it
anyway.
en it entirely depends on the game for me. Obviously, if I'm playing a game like a RPG where, like, not much interaction is involved, if the frame rate drops sometimes, like, if I'm in a dungeon full of monsters or something, it doesn't necessarily bother me. If I'm playing, like, something that's a super precise game, it might bother me more, but,
Mhm.
I don't really make a big deal of the frame rate of some people. If it's locked at 30, awesome. If it's locked at 60, awesome. As long as the game stays consistent enough with
Mhm.
it, I'm usually pretty happy with it.
Mhm.
But,
I've been changing over the years, to be honest. I used to be in the same boat where I was like, I don't care. I don't care. Whatever, especially if it's a turn-based game or something like that. I don't care. But I don't know, man. I've slowly been morphing into this PC gamer over the
Yeah.
years.
You made my point, and I think it's the PC snob crowd that is the problem.
Well, you get you get used to a certain standard, right?
Right,
Like
right,
if
and
you're playing PC and you have a high-end PC and everything's optimized to the point where literally nothing you play dips below
Well,
30 and then you go to play something that's like running, 20 to 25, then I could see like you got used to a certain standard. It'd be like trying to go back and play a game in, low resolution, right? For
Mhm.
like 480p or something for us. We'd be like, "Oh no," like
this is
because we
terrible.
gotten used to better resolution. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
you
don't know. I
know
I I don't think so because, I mean, I've gone back and played some 480p
Oh
games,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Here's the thing. It's like what Stan does is saying is talking about with the resolution. That is a thing I think for certain games where you've gone back, especially some of the like Final Fantasy VIII, for example. If you ever go back and look at that, you like Jesus Christ, what happened to his face? I don't remember. I don't.
that game never looked good.
I guess you're the most handsome guy here.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad out here. Yeah,
Mm,
but so I think that there is something to be said about getting used to that. And I guess it's a little bit of a tangent, but just I've been playing Cyberpunk lately, and on my PC I can do like 100 frames per second, right? At 1440p, or I could put it at 4K and it's like 35, right? And going from 100 to 35, I'm just like I did it just to test it out. I'm like, oh, I'll play it at 30. Like, why not? And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, this is like moving underwater. Like this is very noticeable. But that's because I just put 60 hours in this other way. So
Mhm.
I think it's one of those things. But I don't know. I'm gonna check it out. Eric, you did you ever pick up Hades? I thought you said you did.
oh, yeah, I sure did,
What'd you think about
and
it?
I had a really good time with it. It's definitely a special game. It uses the roguelike element to its highest strength and adds a narrative into it also. I don't think I ever felt stressed or got angry or agitated whenever I died,
Right.
because every time I did, I've looked at it as an opportunity to grow into the narrative and get stuff done. In Hades' chamber before I set out again, and every time I go out, I'm a lot more powerful than I was before. So something that may have been real difficult for me isn't so difficult anymore because one, I have the skill and experience with defeating that boss, and two, I have a lot more equipment and perks to
Mhm.
help me in fights. So every time I go, I feel like I'm getting a lot more done each time,
Mhm.
and it all ties into the story. On top of that, I mean, it's such a well crafted game that I would be tempted to make it my favorite myself on here. The reason I wouldn't necessarily make it my favorite
Oh, here we
RP,
go.
particularly RPG of the year, I
Okay.
don't think the RPG elements are strong enough to
Not
consider
really.
it. Now, it's a fantastic game on its own right. The action and everything is well crafted. And the story, like I said, is very interesting also. Um, but as a RPG in particular, um, I wouldn't rate it higher. But as just like a normal game, if we weren't doing RPG, I might actually rate it higher than
Mm.
what I'm picking.
So for RPG mechanics, it's good, but it's not exceptional. But as a game in its totality, it's excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some would say that. Yeah, yeah.
Like Eric.
Mhm.
Yeah. I know what you mean, Eric, because I was trying to contemplate this year as well for what I was going to pick. And there was a part of me that was like, can I get away with Ghost of Tsushima? And I kept thinking about it and I was like, no, it's like one step too far removed for me for like the RPG mechanic. Obviously Hades is much more of an RPG than Ghost of Tsushima is, but it's like they've removed like a one element from it that would just like push it over the edge into RPG territory. But anyways, so that's interesting.
I have a question for Eric and Geo. Like you mentioned before, it's a roguelike RPG. Have you guys played a lot of roguelike RPGs before Hades?
Not really.
Yeah.
I'm actually not a real big fan of rogue games.
Yeah.
I've actually been creating exceptions lately because there have been really well crafted ones. I haven't been a big fan of the old school ones, but I did play like Dead Cells and Hades, like we said, and they both offer some real unique mechanic to make the rogue element interesting. I usually don't care for the element in itself, but if you do something to catch my attention with it, I'm definitely open to the concept.
Yeah, in the same vein, I think as of maybe more recently, that genre has progressively gotten a little better. Um, with Rogue Legacy, you have Dead Cells, like I mentioned before, Children of Morta. They're all doing something a little bit different, where it keeps people interested. And specifically, Children of Morta and Hades, that narrative beat is really kind of important to me, anyway. Just to keep you a little more interested. Obviously, the combat has to be engaging. Has to be, especially with Hades, it's really tight. So that combat has to be there. But that narrative again, to me, is just so important.
So the story holds up then?
I think so.
Okay. Because that was
Maybe
another
not.
thing I was
Maybe
kind of
not.
curious about.
Maybe not Eric, but I mean, I think so.
Yeah, well, Eric's kind of a
Yeah, I know this
hard to
game
please.
like towards the end of the year has gotten a lot of it's gotten a lot of acclaim for a subgenre roguelike RPG, right? That is typically like very niche. It's like a very niche genre, but then this game is like, so I was wondering if there was something that this game did in particular that maybe just like brought in newcomers to the genre. Like, is it more forgiving than other roguelike games, or is it really just the story that's the hook, or in the presentation?
I think it's more the art style, like the presentation definitely draws people in. Like I had mentioned before, it's voice acted, so I think that plays a big part in a lot of I don't know. I guess you could call them the newbies. Brings those common folk in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does a lot of the stuff kind of that like the AAA games out there are doing. They have it feels like a high budget game. It really does.
I think another thing is the art of its progression. Usually, a lot of rogue likes I've seen, they've never really used the narrative of the rogue nature. It usually is just like that's the thing that's there, and if you die, you start back at the beginning and you start with a different map. But it's not a lot of the roguelike games don't really um, jump into that element narrative wise. So like in Hades, even though you may die at a certain part, you still feel like you're progressing in the game. You don't feel like you're completely starting over. That frustration right there. And like I said, it's so well incorporated into the narrative that you still feel like, every time you die, that you feel like you're still getting something done and moving forward. And Dead Cells, to a lesser extent, does that. When you die, the map completely changes again, but you have a lot of perks working with you. And there is a reason that it randomizes, but Hades, I think, does it much better in that regard. So people don't really like the feeling of starting all over and then having to figure out the map again. But in games like this, it serves a purpose so well that people are willing to continue and be open to it.
Yeah. It's definitely made a big splash. I saw that it was like beating like $100 million games in some of the polling and various awards out there. So definitely a good pick for sure. I'll be curious to hear what your runner up is and why it didn't beat it. But Stan,
Can I won't come out and say it, but
you can if you want. I go.
No. I'm gonna wait. But it's probably not considered an RPG by some. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
So even more so than Hades. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be like Call of Duty, but it's gonna have like a game loop, a RPG loop.
You're spoiling it.
Yeah. Stan, what do you got for your favorite?
All right, for me, 2020 was actually like a catch-up year. I didn't even play all that many new RPGs. Like I think I can count them on one hand. But I played a bunch of other great games that I missed out on, like Horizon Zero Dawn and some other games that have been way in the backlog. But of the games that actually came out in 2020, Xenoblade Chronicles, the definitive edition, as they call it, on Switch, was my favorite. And
did you had played that before the Switch version, right?
Oh yeah, okay. On the Wii. Yeah, it was. I mean, and it still is now. Just this new version has replaced the original for me, like a top 10 RPG for me. And I think that I see no reason to go back to the original version. The only thing that's kind of an opinion people have is like the art style, right? But this version has just so many, what's the word I'm looking for? Quality of life improvements to the questing system, and like your character costumes. You can change the aesthetics however you like, so that they all match, so that your characters don't look like stupid in the in the cutscenes with all the mismatched armor. That you equip the armor for the stats, but then they look like they have like a like
so it's like
armor,
Schultz
but then
not wearing a little like tiny like Aladdin shirt with like goggles, and it's like a serious scene. Yeah.
They can
small like Shulk with these big shoulder pads.
Yeah, so that you have full control of the cosmetics basically, which is nice. You have a remastered soundtrack that's there if you want it, or you can just turn it off and listen to the original tracks, and various other improvements that we've discussed a lot.
Yeah, what I thought was cool about this re-release, I did have issues with it, but what I thought was cool was, the added content you could experience without having to beat the entire game again, because it is a very long game. And I never played Xenoblade Chronicles until we reviewed it on our podcast, and I played it on Dolphin, the emulator, and, did it that way. And I love the game. It's one of my favorite RPGs for sure. But to me, personally, to pick that game for this year, it just didn't sit right with me, just because the added content, it was kind of a hit or miss with me. The remade soundtrack, it was like some of the songs I enjoyed more. Some of them I liked the original better. The art updates. I liked the environment updates. I thought that looked a lot better. But then I didn't like the way Shulk looked. I thought that he looked too young. I preferred the Vagrant Story style art aesthetic that we had with the original game. And I liked the quest updates, but then the quests weren't very good. Even though I could navigate through them quicker, they weren't fantastic quests anyways. So it was kind of like this mixed bag. And on top of that, there was some resolution issues that I wasn't happy with. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted this Wii game remastered was to have it in 1080p, and not have to emulate it on my PC. And, the game would run at like 520p sometimes. And I was trying to figure out why, because it's a Wii game. But I do think that for all intents and purposes, I think the re-release is a net positive. I don't see me playing the original version over this, just because of all those additions you've just laid out, Stan. It does make it, I don't know if I'd say the definitive version, but even though that's what they want to dub it, but it is the better version. I know that's basically a definitive version.
I will agree with Stan that if I ever go back to this game again, it will most definitely be the Switch version.
Yeah.
Those quality of life features are just too good.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you want the original experience, definitely play it on the Dolphin with the HD texture
The
pack.
Dolphin emulator. Yeah. Just if you guys didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah. But if you want like the best like accessibility version, this version is legit. And I will say, you're right that some of the songs in the remastered were not so great. But I will say, I felt so like my mind was so out there when I was climbing Mechanis, and that theme that just kept going, the remastered version of it just clicked with me so hard that like my mind was just like in another world, just like going into it. And I love when I get myself immersed to that level. Because like you said, Xenoblade's a really long game, but it still always feels very short to me because I'm enjoying it so much. And I look at the menu, I'm like, oh crap, I've gotten like 50 hours out of this already.
I come at this with a different perspective, right? I've never played the Wii version, and I come at it just playing the Switch version. I had a lot of issues with it. Number one, the narrative is fine. Okay, I have zero issues with that. The combat to me felt very very clunky. Where if there are positional attacks, I keep having to switch the art or whatever and stop my movement around the enemy. It felt very 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 awkward to do a lot of those move sets, especially the positional ones. So I had an issue with that. It was really struggled with it. Another one was I know they streamlined it for this version. The side quests are absolutely terrible. They add zero to the story.
Except there's a few where I would say it's worth doing. The side quest to get the mini reactor, you have to rebuild this city, I think is actually pretty good. But there's some that stand out. But yeah, 95% of them are just fetch quests.
They're just fetch quests, mundane. They just add zero to the narrative. But on top of like, it was just I couldn't get past the combat. That was just a really tough go for me. And I don't know if it was like that originally. I know they did some things. I have no idea what they did. But that was just a massive hurdle for me.
The biggest improvements to the battle system is definitely they let you know if you're in the correct position.
That's right.
To strike an enemy. In the previous versions, they don't have that. You kind of just have to guess that you're on the side or behind the enemy. even though some enemies are harder to detect that. So I do appreciate they put that in.
Yeah, they're
I can empathize with you, Gio, because when I played the game the first time, it was on a Dolphin emulator and I was playing with a PlayStation 4 controller. And like it kept, and I never owned a Wii, right? So it kept telling me like all these buttons to press to do the moves and such. And I was trying to correlate like, okay, what did I program the Z button to? And on my, I was like, I don't think I've used that button yet. And so that's a totally another layer that I can't criticize the game for, because that's me trying to play the game in a way that it wasn't intended to. But even then, I think eventually I got the hang of it. Over my 100-hour playthrough, I eventually, it just kind of clicked with me a little bit. But I do think that there was certain things that early on, it doesn't do you any favors. When it tries to teach you new moves, for some reason, the game developers felt like it was a good idea to have you try this new move in a boss battle, which is not the best place to do that. You know, that's not a good environment, because if you fail, like you lose, a third of your health, right? So it's just weird things like that I found I remember finding pretty frustrating my first time through. But, and then there was other things too, like the game would, like certain equipment wouldn't work against like a certain, like for example, the Monado wouldn't hurt humanoid enemies.
Yeah.
And it told me that, but it was like 25 to 30 hours until that was actually a problem. And I was like trying to like figure out what was I doing wrong, and what do I need to like put like a special move on this character? And there was little things like that, like the game wouldn't tell you. But I think what kept me invested in the game was the characters were well written, the story was great, the music was great, and then the world is just beautiful, a beautiful world. And that gem crafting system is awesome. I love doing that. Like I would just beef my characters up so much. So, but I mean, the game had a lot of padding with the dungeons, but it was this weird thing where I didn't want to criticize it, because every new dungeon was so handcrafted that it was almost a compliment. But then does it really need to be so damn long? I mean, it can, so it was a kind of a mixed bag for me, but I ended up really loving it. So
maybe I'll have to jump back into it with a kind of just like wipe the state clean and just kind of
plow through.
Back to it.
I mean, you can put it on easy mode if that feels better for you.
Yeah, maybe just don't make fun of me in front of everyone, okay?
Yeah, well,
some people switch the like the way you go through the arts with they switch it to like the shoulder buttons.
See, that would have made more sense to me. I've seen people doing different kind of controller mappings now that you can do that on the Switch.
Yeah, so that way you can keep your thumb on the character's movement, like the joystick, and then you're using your fingers to just like switch to the correct art, rather than constantly switching from the left joystick to the D-pad and scrolling back and forth to the right art. And then by the time you get back to the joystick, the enemy has like turned position, right? And so,
and that's what was so that's what bothered me, and I just couldn't get past it. But maybe I'll have to go back and try the different, like the remappings.
Yeah. Eric, what did you have for your 2020 game?
Well, I say this as someone who,
no man, be confident with it.
I gave it some crap throughout our discussions, but I still ultimately think in terms of RPGs this year, it ultimately hit the top with me, despite some of my grievances with the game. But the pick I had this year was Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'll be the one to say it. One of us have to.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good pick.
Yeah. So I know everyone's disappointed. It's not like the full story. It's only part 1. It's Midgar. And I am disappointed in a lot of the things, like the padding of the side quests, not being very meaningful, and some dungeons should have been longer than they should have. And there's a lot of points where it's like, man, now they're just trying to find reasons for it to be the 40-hour game. But then there's the scenes that they faithfully recreate in the game, and like it's so spot on to the original game that like it gives you that warm fuzzy feeling when they do, because I do think they faithfully recreated all these characters. There's a lot of debate if material after Final Fantasy VII, like Advent Children and the whole FF7 universe after that, was able to faithfully capture what made these characters great.
Mhm.
But I think the FF7 remake, despite some of the Nomura like stuff that got added into it, still did a great job in recreating the characters we know and love through the game. The combat system itself is very engaging and fun.
Perfect.
That's definitely one of the highlights of the game. I think they actually did some improvements story-wise to the game, like the wall market segment is
Mhm.
just so much better than what's in the original game. They took that to like to the max, and I love that they did it. They didn't hold back on it either. And of course, and this may be a slight spoiler here, so you can tune out for like 30 seconds if you want, but letting Hell House be a boss is so amazing. There's such a huge debate on how you're able to get that in such a serious looking remake. And Square Enix took that as a challenge and added Hell House as a boss. And I'm like, no way.
Can I
Yeah.
interject for just 1 second on that? There was a trailer that dropped right before the game came out, and it was a really long trailer, and there were so many spoilers in it, like things that had changed with the remake, like huge plot beats they put in that trailer. And I'm not very sensitive to spoilers, but in that trailer had Hell House. And I remember like when I saw that trailer, I jumped out of my chair a little bit because I was like, there's no way. I didn't think they're going to put that in there. And so when I saw that, I got super excited. But that was the first time, I think, like in a long time, where I was actually disappointed that I saw that before the game came out. Usually I'm not sensitive
Oh,
to spoilers
yeah.
at all, but just the way that game that is actually revealed is just awesome. Gio, you haven't played the game, have you?
No, I don't own a PS4.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sorry. I'm
so
sorry.
I'm trying my best to not spoil it. But
Yeah, no more spoilers. That's
But I'm gonna be honest. I have zero interest in the remake. I've just heard so many. I mean, obviously you're speaking glowingly about it, but I've just heard so many different opinions about it. I'm not sure
Mm.
what to make of it. Maybe it's just something I need to experience on my own. But I mean, I've just heard so many different things.
Have you played the original?
The original, yeah, when it like first came out, but it's been so long.
right.
Oh, okay. You,
and
We were very fair about the game. I feel like
Yeah.
we were very positive about the things we really liked, but there were certain things with it we were not happy with. And we went to
I
like
think we all ultimately
2-hour
liked-
conversation about some of the stuff. Yeah.
I think we all ultimately liked the game. I think our bigger question was the justification of its existence in its form. Like, does it like
That's a pretty
so
big deal.
it technically covers the first 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII. Now, granted, Midgar is where the meat of the dialogue is
Mhm.
in the game, so there is some slight justification to it. One of my biggest criticisms is that I just don't feel like there is enough justification with how the game was formed, that having it only be Midgar was the best choice. I think there is actually a lot of in the game you could have cut out, and you could have added it to making more content past Midgar. But like I said, the game took a much drastic different direction than we all expected, without spoiling it. And I know there's a lot of people who are disappointed it decided to go in this direction, but similar to Kingdom Heart, I know it's like a disaster waiting to happen, but like I'm still intrigued to know how that
How?
disaster happens.
Right.
So
You still want to see it come tumbling down on
yeah,
fire. Yeah.
I think despite Nomura's craziness, I think his craziness fascinates me to a level
Right.
that I'm interested to see what happens next. He does, I guess, a decent job on setting up a mystery for the next game.
Hmm.
That's how Kingdom Hearts normally works. They set
Right.
up plot points that you're interested to know what happens next.
Even Nomura is interested to know what's going to happen next. Because he
Yeah,
doesn't have any
all
idea.
right, so what now?
Yeah. I guess I should bring this up since we're on the topic of the game.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, I didn't play that many 2020 RPGs this year because I was catching up on my backlog, but FF7 Remake was my runner up.
Okay.
So while we're on the topic,
Just
might
want
as well mention that. And yeah, the reason is mostly the reasons Eric just mentioned already. But I think that the two biggest things that just knock it down a peg for me is the certain story choices that we've talked about
to.
in our previous discussions, like kind of the different approach that the that the game took. I just wasn't on board with probably a majority of those choices. Like I think, like Eric said, the moments from the original game that it recreates, it does a very good job. But then the new stuff that's in there doesn't seem as good as the original. And that could just be me just being a fanboy of my, favorite game ever, not ready to accept changes, That's I could be nostalgia blind. That's totally possible.
Well,
but then
go
also,
ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
well, like the second thing is just even if I was on board with those choices, they didn't justify the game being 50 hours long. Like Eric said, the game would have been much better if it was a 25, maybe 30 hours at most. And that's including like doing side content, right? That should be the runtime of the game.
Yeah.
It just has pacing issues kind of throughout, where you get, speaking like Hat's mentioned about Xenoblade Chronicles, like really long dungeons. Well, these dungeons are, I think, even longer. Some of them.
And they are
go
not
back to some of
handcrafted. They are. Yeah.
Yeah.
You go back to one dungeon twice, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. It's like it's very obvious that they're like, oh, like they created like these beautiful environments, right? But then they need those. They can't let you run past those environments in 5 minutes like you did in the original game, right? Because that would just be a waste of time on the developer's part. Like it took them a long time to create these beautiful environments. They're gonna get your money's worth out of them, I guess you could say. But it really kind of slows down the pace of the game at certain points.
So the thing that gets me with the game is that kept it from being my number one. And I'll say just real quickly, just because I don't think I think that sometimes people put too much weight on this, but the fact that it's a remake, they changed the theme of the story. I think that if you're going to remake a story, you should probably keep the same theme if you're going to change stuff. I think that was something they shouldn't have changed, but that's the one thing I'm going to say about it being a remake. And then I'm just going to drop it right there. Kind of. Okay.
I'll give something else positive.
Well, let me say one other thing real quick, and then we'll let you touch this on a positive note. But Katase, who was the original director of the game and now the producer, he marketed the idea of it only taking place in Midgar because he said, back on the PlayStation, Midgar was this big city, but you couldn't really experience the city because the technology wasn't there. And I thought that was kind of BS because they could have just made a bigger city. I mean, it was a 3 and 4 disc games on the PlayStation for Final Fantasy. So I think they could have done it, but whatever. If that's your reason, okay. He wants to show like the grandiosity of the city and we were going to be able to experience it. And I knew they were making story changes. So I thought that to make it only happen in Midgar, they were going to have to slow the pacing a little bit and that we were going to get to experience this entire huge city. Right. And so I was hoping that we were going to get something like Night City from Cyberpunk, maybe not that large, but something similar to that, but in the Final Fantasy VII world. And that would just be the city. And that would be the whole game. And we did get new areas, a few, but it was mostly like the same areas that we got in the original game. It was just a little bit larger. And then, like you said, Stan, most of the new areas were like junkyards or sewers or like some other sort of dungeon where Barrett fell in a hole or something. You know, every freaking hole or like possible thing that could break broke. You know, it was just, and so it felt like instead of me getting to experience the city and the way that I thought we were going to get to be experienced, it felt more like you guys are mentioning here, that there was just a lot of padding that was added to some really excellent moments in the game. And that really just kind of didn't sit well with me, because before I was buying the idea of it only taking place in Midgard because Katase was like excited about it. Like it was an artistic decision. Like, no, I'm going to go all out and show you guys this city. But then when I played the game, I realized like, oh no, it's a business reason. Like exactly. they just want to stretch this out for as many games as possible. And so I didn't appreciate the fact that I could run from one end of Midgard to the other above ground in like 20 minutes, but to do it in these underground sewers would take like hours. You know, it didn't make any sense. But Eric, I know you got something positive you want to add.
I do agree. I actually absolutely agree with everything. I think at the end of the day, I'll just say the positives outweigh the negative. But man, there are some major padding though. Like, that you played the original 7, so it's fine to say this. Like the haunted train yard and the sewers. Like this is where the padding felt like the most egregious, because we're in a rush to get to the Avalanche crew, to get to the tower and prevent Sector 7 from falling. And we get stuck with all this padded content on the way. Like they didn't even try to find a clever way to bring this element in. It's just like, hey, it took technically 10 minutes to get from the sewers to the haunted train yard to where Avalanche is. Like we got to pad it out to like 5-6 hours at least. So there's definitely that. But then again, you had amazing dungeons like the Shinra headquarters that was not only faithfully recreated very well, it was had a really awesome improvements to it. Besides the Hojo Laboratory,
I like the Hojo Laboratory. I'm weird. I'm the only of all the criticisms I have that's one I don't agree with. I enjoyed the Hojo Laboratory. I didn't enjoy the story content in there, but I enjoyed the dungeon itself. It didn't make any sense that it was so large, but
and despite what the final
like how much funding is going towards this guy's laboratory. Anyways,
and despite how much the story reason behind the final boss I'm not a fan of, but I did enjoy the fight itself. It was very dynamic and the music was great. But that's what the positive note I was going to end on is it had a really good soundtrack.
Let me say one more negative thing. All right.
Oh no.
I really enjoyed the game, guys. I really did. But
game of the year.
But Toriyama's involvement with this game, he's been involved with the Final Fantasy franchise for a long time, but his big debut as a director, I believe, was Final Fantasy 13. I think that was his first one. But I know that he originally worked on the Final Fantasy 7 as well. He designed the market area, right, where Cloud cross-dresses and everything like that. So he was one of the co-directors on this game. And I found that a lot of my criticisms that I had of Final Fantasy 13 carried over to 7 Remake, not as bad, but his style of game design is he likes to put like obstacles and restrictions on the player so that he can try to like refine the experience and keep it as engaging as possible. So as an example, in Final Fantasy 13, this is a quick example, the upgrade system, the Crystarium, it wouldn't let you would get to like a certain point in the game and it wouldn't let you go any higher on the skill tree until you move the story forward, no matter how many enemies you defeated, because he was trying to like keep it challenging. And he would like not let you play with certain party members for half the game. He would only let certain parties go together in order to keep it challenging. And that feels artificial to me. What I like about RPGs is like the creativity. Like when I was talking about with Xenoblade, like the gem system, the crafting system. I like to be able to just tweak and tinker with stuff. And when you're just controlling stuff like that, I don't appreciate it. And the 7 remake, I felt like had some of those elements where you would just defeat all the monsters that were available. And like I was like, oh, that's as much money as I can get right now, huh? Nothing else. I can't get any more money. I can't buy anything else. I can't upgrade any. Like there's no more opportunity until like 3/4 of the way in the game. I was able to find a few areas to kind of diverge a little bit, but I mean, it's I don't like his types of his brand of RPGs. It's I don't want to play a visual novel, you know, with some boss fights. So, but other people are really like that. So I think it's a preference, but I do feel like that's another major reason I didn't.
He famously takes his games in a more anime direction a lot
the
of
story.
times, and
Yeah.
because of that, you get a lot of weird, cringy moments that are usually present, especially when you localize it, and it doesn't localize so well.
hmm
Like a lot of Japanese gestures that may not seem weird in Japan, but it does in America.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
they famously tried to bring this over and tried to make something out of it instead of trying to make it seem more natural to Westerners. Final Fantasy VII Remake does have those moments. 13 is probably the most guilty one. And you can see that's very present after you play games like 12, 14, and even 15, I would say. Uh, 15 is well directed, at least like in the voice acting and localization, if I want to
Sure.
give that game any kind of compliment.
Yeah.
And Toriyama's games just like quickly just fall under those. Like, man, this feels more like an anime than a Final Fantasy type
Which
deal.
might be fine if it was like in an anime aesthetic, right?
Yeah, it's not.
But the issue is that it's like they're going for more of like a realism. It's still stylized. It's still like
They still have those anime eyes, like, right? They still have those giant eyes and
yeah. Even FF7 Remake is like clearly stylized. Like Barrett's arms and hands are like the size of Tifa's whole body, right? It's not like
yeah.
completely.
I think they like modeled it after my arms, right?
Don't they kind of
yeah.
do that in the actual Final Fantasy films that are
Yeah.
based off of 7? So I mean, maybe that's kind of what they went for. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just odd. Like when anime characters in an anime have like weird, like exaggerated motions.
Yeah.
It's not as jarring as when it is like in a more photorealistic
Right.
character who's then doing like the same, like very exaggerated, like let's do it, guys. And you're just kind of like, it feels like it should be more subtle.
I just thought of another recipe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like what takes you out of it so quick is it's just not something a human being would do or gesture.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You feel like, and because of that, it's like now you're just taken out of it. Like I remember like in 13.2, it's just you have like these weird characters, and all of a sudden they're just going like it's like
Yeah.
it's like who does that?
Yeah, it's over the
Nope.
top. Yeah.
In this world.
Yeah.
But I mean, 7 Remake, I for all its faults, it I do have to hand it to them that like this is the strongest Final Fantasy that I feel like they've had, aside from the online games. This is the strongest Final Fantasy that they've had since I think the PS2 era. Like it like really in a lot of ways, it really made me feel like, okay, like this is like actually fairly competently made. Like it wasn't like 15 where I felt like significant parts of the story were just like left out, or like it conflicted with the movie they just released a month prior, like like in a big way. Like it's just like you guys like are either rushing this out or like this just like you didn't think this through. And like so like I've kind of had that feeling with Final Fantasy for a while. So when I played 7 Remake, I was like, okay, Square's like putting their foot in the right direction. They're on their way to being back to possibly some kind of former glory. At least PS2 era is kind of in that range of quality. So
I completely agree. This doesn't feel like something that went through development hell.
Even though it did.
I mean, kind of.
It got remade. Like it was like in development, and it got pulled from Cyber Connect, and then they had to start from scratch again.
But it feels like a complete package.
Oh yeah.
Like I feel like I got my money's worth out of the game, despite some complaints. I don't feel like 15 where it's like it's over. It's like what the hell? It's like what happened here? What happened here? Why can't I do this? Why isn't there like enough side quests in the World of Ruin or anything like that? It's like why did I have to watch a movie and an anime just to get into this? I mean, FF7 for what it is, I do agree is a complete package, and you do not have to engage in other content.
Well, just don't play it first, because it's
you got to play the original and then this one,
because it does
spoil. Now you do.
It spoils. Anyways, we talked about it in our review, but if you've never played Final Fantasy VII before, playing the remake will be fine, but it's gonna like give major spoilers to like all sorts of stuff from later in the game. So, it is what it is. So, yeah. You guys mind if I talk about my favorite RPG of 2020?
We do.
Yeah. No.
Well, I mean, we can skip it. It's not really that big of a deal.
Yeah, let's skip it.
No, but my favorite RPG of this year. This is going to get people. If me criticizing the 7 remake was not enough hatred, I'm going to pick Cyberpunk 2077 as my favorite RPG of 2020.
Did you play any other RPGs this year? I mean,
what's that?
Did you play any other RPGs this year?
I played a lot of RPGs, yeah.
Oh, okay, just checking.
Yeah, thanks.
But we are an RPG podcast after all.
Oh, yeah.
Cyberpunk really surprised me because I was cautiously looking forward to it, but I didn't know what to expect because I really liked The Witcher 3, but what I saw from Cyberpunk, it seemed like they were doing something different.
Yeah.
Like I was concerned it was going to drop a lot of the RPG elements and it was going to become this like Grand Theft Auto sci-fi experience. And then I was pleasantly surprised when I picked it up on PC that it was actually an RPG. You look like you want to say something, Gio.
No, I do think that there are very Grand Theft Auto.
Okay, so let's address this first because I know
I was getting Fallout vibes when I saw it.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that because I think you both are making good points here. First, Eric, I do agree that this game does look kind of like Fallout in terms of its presentation. I do think it varies quite a bit, especially when you start to play it. But it, in many ways, is the view of the future through the lens of what people thought the future might be like in the 1980s, right? So if you were to watch a 1980s futuristic film, this is what the future was imagined to be. And I see a lot of people trying to think about this game in terms of, would they have this in the 2070s? Why don't they have that? This is a very much a fantasy world where you're viewing the future through the lens of the 1980s, very similar to Fallout, which viewed the future through the lens of the 1950s. In regards to Gio, your point that this looks or has a lot of elements from Grand Theft Auto, I would be a lying fool if I did not acknowledge that. There are certain elements that I think absolutely is taken directly from Grand Theft Auto, but it feels more like an influence or a slight nod than their actual goal here. Like the game flows just like a Witcher 3 game where when you're playing Witcher 3, you're just doing mission after mission after side quest after side quest. It's not like a Skyrim sandbox RPG where you're just going to like go explore a cave and make an adventure on your own. It's a very story driven and it's meant to be played in that way where you're just doing, okay, what's the next mission? What's the next mission? It's not a Grand Theft Auto experience where I'm just going to run out in the alley and start killing hookers and getting in the battles with the police and everything like that. Go ahead.
I will tell you though that there are elements like that where I've played it as well. I have about 35 hours in it right now, and there are so many nooks and crannies where you can exploring. You can really get lost in, but it's not like your Grand Theft Auto where where you are killing those people. But it definitely has its problems. But I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so I think like I do acknowledge a lot of the issues, but I think like the way like the positives of the game just really impressed me. And honestly, I am playing on PC. I do want to re-emphasize that. I've seen people talk about their experience on the PlayStation, the Xbox One. If I had that experience where it crashed 45 times, I don't think I would like it as much. I didn't have a single crash the entire time I played it. I put 90 hours into it, so there's that. But I guess what I mean by it's not Grand Theft Auto and its design is that the core gaming loop is different from a Grand Theft Auto game. Pulling people out of cars, that's a mechanic just like Grand Theft Auto, except they've RPG'd it because you can't just pull anyone out of cars. Certain cars require you to have a certain skill level. I think it's technical ability. You have to add attribute points to technical skills in order to pull certain people out of certain cars. So some of the cheaper cars you can just pull anyone out of. Some of the more expensive ones, maybe the ones with higher security, then those would be more difficult for you. So they've definitely put an RPG spin on it. So I think that that's important to acknowledge. It's this huge, very scenic world that you can explore, and it's very fun from that regard. But I do think that Grand Theft Auto prioritized more in its gaming loop as an action adventure game and a sandbox game for you to just almost be somewhat like a real life simulator, you know, where there's just a lot more things to do in that game. And it's designed with the idea that people don't really finish the game. They just want to alleviate their boredom and be able to do a variety of different things. In Cyberpunk, they very much took the Witcher 3 route, which they made Witcher 3, that makes sense, where they really prioritized the setting as kind of a dressing or a set piece. And they just had side quests and stories. They focused on telling stories as opposed to making sure that V pulls men and women out differently out of the car, or investing a lot of time in letting you have different sushi graphics, you eating sushi and different meals. There's not a lot of that extra fluff and flair in there that you get from a Grand Theft Auto game, which they've been working on for years. But I think that's okay because I don't think that's what they were trying to go after. It's an RPG and it's meant to tell stories. The characters are very well developed and well written. And so if you play the game with the quest flow that they have set in place, it doesn't feel absent that stuff isn't there. But I think that people that expected Grand Theft Auto, or they expected this more sandboxy type environment, I do think that those people are probably doing themselves a disservice by picking this game up and trying to play it like that, because that's not what they did here. It's very much like Witcher 3. And Witcher 3, can you shoot the wheels off a wagon? No, you can't. Can you go around and slaughter an entire village? No, you can't. Are the guards going to chase you across 3 continents? No, it's not. Why? Because it gets in the way of the story. They created in Witcher 3 this huge open world as just a background, as a set piece for them to tell this masterful story. And that's basically what you get here with Cyberpunk. So I would say, first off, I acknowledge fully that, you know, yeah, the NPCs, if they're not part of a quest, you trying to converse with them, they're just going to say 1 or 2 lines, just like Witcher 3. There's not going to be V eating sushi. You can't blow the tires out of cars. There's not even a Gwent card game in this game. It's just, you can't play any of the arcade games. You can't do any of that stuff. But if you play the quests, you do the side missions, you get to know the characters. It's just the attention to detail within the world itself that really just sucked me in. There's this YouTube video that was made by this YouTube channel called Morphologist, and basically he's an architect, and it's called An Architect Reviews Cyberpunk 2077. And I think he does a perfect job of just like going into detail about what's so great about this world without spoiling the game, I highly recommend people go check it out. But what he does is he explains that as an architect that builds, structures, you have to also think about what do you want people to feel like when they're in this environment, right? And that's something that you can tell when you're playing Cyberpunk is they had a strong sense of identity with what the game was trying to get across. And he points out things like when you get into the elevators, they look like freight elevators. They're not made for people, but it's because the world itself views people as inventory. It's just an opportunity to make money. I mean, you're blasted with advertisements. There's always, even in V's own apartment, there's a vending machine inside of his own apartment. Like it's so well realized. I mean, you go to the poor parts of town, it's just so grimy, and there's fence posts that are missing. And at one point I was walking through it and a woman just fell off, right? Because there wasn't a posting there, and it wasn't a bug. She fell down and then she died when she hit the impact, right in front of me. And I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is so intense. But I mean, there's just such an attention to detail within the world that, at least in the way that it's designed, that really just sucked me in. I mean, everything feels so handcrafted. I go to new buildings and new shops, and I don't see the same furniture in different shops. It's all just unique, and it really adds so much to the game. And it's just a blast to be able to explore. And even, walking around, you see NPCs that'll just be having a conversation. And I remember seeing these two police officers that are talking about how the city just uses them. Like they don't matter. And her husband killed himself or it was something along those lines. And they were consoling each other. And I'm like, this isn't even part of a mission. They're just talking. And I happen to be walking by. And there's just little things like that I find to be just really just made it a very immersive experience for me. To me, the way that I played the game, I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic. But I see people out there trying to play it like a Rockstar game. They're not even doing the side missions. They're just walking around the city trying to attack people and make their own adventure. And I can see if that's what they wanted from it, why it's a disappointing experience. But I think that if you play it very similarly to Witcher 3, I think that, you're going to have a much better time. I mean, the story's great. The characters are great. I mean, I'll just real quick, the stuff that sucks. The user interface is atrocious. Driving sucks. Inventory management's awful. The main story is not congruent with the side stories. There's a sense of urgency with the main story that makes you wonder why you're doing all these side missions. But I mean, ultimately, dude, I finished the game. I did all the stuff that I could do. And I'm still thinking about the story and trying to thinking about some of the side quests and I've had a blast with it. I still found myself last night thinking about the story and some of the things that happened and trying to figure out what they were trying to get across. And it's just, I don't know. I think it's one of those games that's kind of like Death Stranding. You're either going to like it or you're not. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the negative points you just pointed out sound like some negative points there in Witcher 3. Like the inventory system in Witcher 3, I find pretty atrocious in itself.
This is really bad because every gun, there's so many, it's a positive that on the guns themselves, it's more than just a shooter. I rarely ever shoot. I usually use my cyber abilities where I can just hack people and stuff like that. But the guns themselves, you can kill 10 people and loot them all, and 5 of them will have the same gun, but they'll be slightly different stats. And then in your inventory, you'll have 5 different versions of the same gun. Right. And you're trying to sit there and figure out which one do I sell? And then there'll be a relic, but you feel like you shouldn't sell it, or it'll say it's rare, but you have 5 of them, and it's in the game itself, you can beat the game in 20 hours, but you're going to miss 80% of the game because there's so many side characters that you're just going to miss. And it changes the Act 3 entirely. And you don't even get a chance to really experiment with the combat system if you play it like that. So it's got its issues, but I loved it. So
I think what they had a tough gig on is that, like, even though Witcher 3 is one of the greatest RPGs of all time, said by many, not just myself, um,
yeah,
there are some who hyped Cyberpunk 2077 to the point that it was just going to be perfect and absolute gold coming out. And the reality of it is that even Witcher 3 itself, despite how amazing of a game it is,
sure.
has its problems. Like Hat pointed out, like a lot of stuff you can attribute to Witcher. It's like it's hard to steer Roche, especially in the small, narrow trails. The inventory system in Witcher 3 is like borderline garbage, even after like the revamp of it, and it was like slow and laggy, and there was bugged NPCs in that game too. But the thing that drew people in was the character, the Geralt, the story, the world, um, and to the lesser extent, the combat. Um, I mean, Cyberpunk, I feel like is just like the style of game that just CD Projekt makes, and like even though they make like great games and stories, or I mean like great character stories and like world building, like they do falter in some gameplay departments. Definitely not enough that makes the game not fun, but there are those slight grievances that people need to realize that this is not a company that makes perfect games. These are companies that make very good and engaging games.
Well, even
Right?
even in Witcher 3, I would say that you can beat the entire game without tapping like half the gameplay mechanics that you can use with the combat system. I mean, and most reviews for Witcher 3 will tell you, hey, bump it up to hard or very hard because normal is just not enough. And like that game, you're supposed to apply oils to your sword depending on what type of monster you're fighting. And there's all sorts of like different things you can stack in the upgrade system that can make it a very different experience. But most people don't even know how to use half that crap because you can beat the entire game on normal like pretty easily, except a few bosses. You might have to, try some different strategies, but it's the same problem with Cyberpunk. I mean, you can if you just stick to like it tells you like the risk level for missions. If you do all the low risk missions first, and then you do all the medium risk missions first, and then you do all the high ones, right? You're never going to be challenged, and you're never going to branch outside of what you're comfortable with. And I've had the most fun just, you know what, let me try that very high mission. Let me see what happens. And, like it's got a lot of fluidity to it. But anyways, Gio, you've put 30 something hours into it.
Yeah,
I know you're on console, so
yeah, I'm playing on the Series X. So it's probably the tier under playing on PC,
mhm,
and I've run into a few game crashes and a lot of glitches
yeah.
just on that. But I will say that CD Projekt Red, they are phenomenal at world building, immersion, that sort of stuff. Like you were saying, they build that cyberpunk world. They got that aesthetic, that feel, like you had mentioned, the grimy feel. I think they hit that aesthetic out of the park. Where they have a problem is they bring in this wanted system that is essentially broken. I will say
Mhm.
that I've been on rooftops and I've attacked an enemy. It is an enemy, and all of a sudden I've got a star, and and I'm on a roof, and there are police officers everywhere. They're coming
Let,
out of walls. They're
let me
coming out
ask you a question about that.
of
I've never had a problem with me shooting an enemy and having that happen, but I know what you're talking about where, and it's really annoying because I can only drive with a motorcycle. And
Me too.
if I drive with a car, it's just too, like taking turns is just a death sentence for any of the NPCs walking on the sidewalk. And
Yeah,
it's a problem because if I run somebody over, I have a
star.
star and the police will literally warp into where you are immediately. Whereas in Grand Theft Auto, which it's kind of modeled after, it would only be if the police see you
See you,
do the crime.
or they start chasing you when they encounter you. They don't just pop you out of thin air.
So let
It's
me
just
let me ask you though, because I'm curious. I was thinking about this, and I think the reason they did that was because it's an RPG. and you can level up. And if I were to take my car and just run down the sidewalk 80 civilians while the police weren't on that block, I would level up to like level 50 in like 10 minutes, you know? But because it's an RPG, they have to put some kind of system in place to prevent you from doing that. And so I think that's why the police just warp in there, because there's no like, I don't stop and like stand my ground with the police. Like it's like, let me, run away, because if you get like 2 or 3 stars, like it's just kill shots. But I think that's like what they had in mind.
Right. But it's just overkill. It's just way too much. Like I'm shooting an enemy, but I'm out of combat, so they penalize you for that for some reason, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But either way, like I said, they just come out of nowhere. It's crazy. But there are some, like you had mentioned, you were just walking by someone and all of a sudden they just start talking. And I've actually encountered side quests that way, where I just hear someone talking and they talk about a certain place. You go to the place, that object exists, and it brings you on a side quest. So
Mhm.
I've encountered that quite a few times, and it's not like out in the open where you just get the side quest. You just run into things, and it's just like you just follow the trail like you're Sherlock Holmes. But so it's just things like that small a detail exists. I think they do a great job with that. Um, but yeah, obviously, there are a lot of bugs. I've had people. I was on a mission where there was a dance party on the top of a roof,
Okay.
and I go by the building, and then I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden people are off of the roof and in the middle of the street, but 2 stories high, and they're dancing way up top, way up high, and I couldn't continue the quest because the dude that I needed to get the quest from was in the middle of the street, 20 feet up in the air. So,
So,
so there,
yeah. Let me also just say that when I gave my impressions for the game, and I said I was like 30 hours in and I haven't had a single bug, now having put 90 hours in, I've experienced I have experienced bugs. Nothing like a crash or anything like you just experienced, but the one thing that was most common that I experienced is sometimes if I would talk to a Ripper Doc, which is just like a shop owner, right? And I was comparing some cyberware that I was looking at buying. When I would close the menu, that like whatever I was looking at would stay on the screen. And the only way to fix it would be to go back and talk to the Ripper Doc, and then they'll reopen the menu and then close it again. And then it would go away. But it was a problem because there would be specific NPCs that they wouldn't really sell cyberware to anybody. It would just be in a specific situation and dialogue options. I happened to talk them into selling me something, and it would have amazing cyberware, and I would buy the stuff, and then that thing would be on the screen permanently, and I couldn't go back and talk to him because it was like a one-time deal. So then I would have to find a Ripper Doc somewhere else, and like, it'd be like driving me crazy because I'm like, God damn it, where's one? Because I just want to get this thing off my screen. And so I had stuff like that would happen occasionally. And then the other thing, there was 2 other things that would happen. One time, the NPCs wouldn't help me in combat. This was after I installed the last patch. I installed it in the middle of a quest. I think there was a problem, but Pan Am was supposed to be helping me, and she would just stand there and like talk. And it was like killing the romance because I was trying to romance her. And I was like, dude, I'm about to shoot you in the head because like I cannot complete this mission because you are supposed to help me, and I'm doing this all by myself. But yeah, and I got through it, and then I reconciled with Pan Am, but it was driving me crazy. But then there was another part where this was later in the game where I had to shoot all these like mechoids down, and there was like 16 of them, and I had a little counter, and I defeated all of them, but it still said it was stuck at 15. And like, I like ran around forever. There was nothing left. So then I restarted the game, and then I killed all 16 of them, and then it continued on. I was like, okay, good. But then Pan Am was telling me to get in the vehicle, right? But like Pan Am was nowhere to be found. And I was just running all over. I was looking at the map, and it was saying she was like way off in the boonies. But every time I went over to that marker, it would tell me I had drifted too far from the mission, and it would teleport me back, and I was like losing my mind. So then I did the mission again and killed all 16 of those things again. And then finally, you know, she was like, V, get in the freaking basilisk or whatever. And then I got in there and we continued on with no issues. But so I have had some bugs since then, but fortunately none of the crashing or unable to finish, besides that one issue, unable to finish a quest. So
Can you do that one where you push the guy in the wheelchair and he gets up out of the wheelchair and runs away?
I haven't experienced that. No.
What I was going to say, I will say, it allows many different play styles, right? So you can go in running gun, you can go in kind of just with a sniper rifle, kind of stay back, kind of stealthy approach. You can go in with a stealthy approach. You can go in just kind of stealthy and hack only if you want to challenge yourself that way. So they've implemented a lot of different ways where you can approach quests, however you want to, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's a good time. I think that if you approach it like a CD Projekt Red RPG and just expect that, I think you'll be doing yourself a service. I think that if you go in expecting this sandbox RPG, you're going to be disappointed because there's not a lot of extra stuff to do besides the missions, which are very engaging and can be very random. Like Gio pointed out, sometimes you'll just follow a clue and find this whole trail of side quests, and it's very engaging that way. But there's not, you know, Gwent. There's not a card game. There's no, like, I've seen people online say they want like things where V can go eat sushi. I'm like, like, I don't know why. I'm glad they didn't focus on stuff like that. The stuff they focused on is things I care about, you know, missions, story, combat, that type of thing. But there's not a lot of the typical sandboxy type things that people, I think, were expecting, which, to CD Projekt Red's criticism, they didn't do a good job dispelling some of the Grand Theft Auto comparisons. They kind of rode that hype.
Yeah.
So it's kind of on them too, but this is a CD Projekt Red RPG.
They also, you know, got like Keanu Reeves, right, for their game, and also to promote the game. And he's like in these little ad spots saying like, in Night City, you can become anyone for the right price, right? So it gives everybody kind of like an idea of like a very
well, in
a
the
game that
story,
gives you tons and tons of options. Yeah,
that is true in the story, but it's not, you know, like a Fallout or something like that where you can like literally just assassinate, you know, a main character, and then like it's gonna, like, I don't know, let you create your own like separate adventure that way. I mean, it does have a lot of variety, but yeah, it's, you know, I think it's, this game, like Eric was pointing out, was kind of already set up to not meet expectations because Witcher 3 has just been a tremendous hit. I mean, and they added so much DLC onto that for free. 16 pieces of DLC were free that they added onto the main game, and then there are 2 expansions. So I think a lot of people played a game that was supported for like 3 or 4 years after launch, and really just like we're like, wow, this is amazing. And then they expect this game to be like that at launch, and it's
not quite there.
Yeah.
Right.
I think though it needed, you know, another 6 to 12 months of time, a lot more time. I mean, they've delayed it and delayed it and delayed it, but it just needed that extra cooking.
Yeah.
I'll say it once, I'll say it again. I think their development would have gone a lot more smoothly if they just straight out canceled the PS4 and Xbox One version and just focus on releasing it for PC, then later PS5 and Xbox. I understand on the business side why they went the route they did, but I think in terms of best quality, I think they should have just straight out dropped the PS4 and Xbox One version.
Kind of put in a tough spot though, because they really started development kind of early, where maybe the PS4 Pro had just come out. Maybe you know, they were just kind of stuck in that cycle where they were developing for the Xbox, the original Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, maybe I don't know how different the architecture is for developing on those other on the newer gen consoles, but they were
I
just stuck. That was the problem.
Yeah, I just this whole launch fiasco. I mean, I have an unpopular opinion, but I'm just chopping it up to a COVID year. And
Yeah.
there were some bad decisions made by management, of course. So that's not
Mhm.
trying to alleviate that, but just if I don't see the game launching in the way it was, if it wasn't a COVID year, I think that, that's just slowed down development, people working remotely. I mean, even at my own job, I've talked about it where there's some people like they don't work too well from home. I mean, they'll get like half the job done because half the performance that they had back at the office, but just because it's hard to stay focused. I mean, especially if you got kids running around and everything, they're not allowed in school. I don't know where it was and how it was in their country, but I mean, there was a lot of factors this year, so I'm just kind of chopping it up to that. And
Sure.
Man, all I can say is whoever had to work on the genitalia slider, I really hope their kids were not home.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So. But yeah, it's a great game. Definitely go check it out. I would say wait if you haven't picked it up yet. If you don't have a beefy PC, they're coming out with a free DLC upgrade. They said early 2021. So I don't know what that DLC is going to have. It's probably just going to be more quests and stuff like that. But if you just wait until that update, it's probably going to have by then they'll have some more patches that have been out. They have a big patch that's coming out in January, a big one that's coming out in February. And it's already a lot better, I think, after the 6 patches that they've put out thus far. So I would just wait a few more months if you all want to check it out. If you have a Series X or if you have a PC, maybe pick it up by then. But man, this thing really puts puts my PC in like a heart attack mode. I mean, while I'm playing it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I should have upgraded further. But it's been a blast. So, Gio, what was your runner up? I mean, you picked Hades for your RPG of 2020, but what was your runner up? And why did this game not beat Hades?
My runner-up was Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. Like I had mentioned, some people may or may not call it a RPG.
Right.
I mean, it just didn't hit out of the park. It had a lot of problems. It's a Musu game, so some people have problems with that already. The combat is kind of mundane, where it's more you're hitting combos, but it's just more button mashy than anything. But what really stuck out to me in this was the narrative and how hyper focused it was on Zelda and the kind of the prequel moments to Breath of the Wild. Um, so you're kind of experiencing what happened, and like I said, it's just really focused on Zelda, and you get to see how emotional she is, and they're just the cinematic, just the scenes in Age of Calamity alone are really worth the price of admission. They're just done so well, uh, and you could tell that the team kind of got a lot of help from the Breath of the Wild developers in this.
Mm,
The scenes are just done so well. The side quests, there are just that's how your character progression is done, is really through the side quests, and there are just so many, and they are actually more interesting than the actual main objectives, in my opinion. But there are quite a bit, and it's done in the Breath of the Wild aesthetic, so you kind of have that going for it as well.
Well, I can tell you that that was actually my game of the year, not my RPG of the year.
Mm.
I like the track you go, man, but like it's just a little just like curved for me and what I think.
wait, well,
But
real quick, why was this game not as good as Hades?
Well, like I said, the combat just doesn't get there for
Okay,
me, whereas in Hades, it does. Um, that's pretty much it. I think
that's it. Okay,
this one is so hyper focused on the narrative. And it's a really well done game. I have absolutely no problems with it. It's my runner up in some people's game of the year.
Some people. Eric, what were you saying? You were criticizing him because it was not quite an RPG.
Yeah, like I said, the RPG elements themselves don't uh make it for what it is for me. Of course it has that Muso element to it, but like you said, the story is actually really strong. It's not completely what you expect what it is, especially if you're coming from Breath of the Wild, but still once you know what it is, it's still great for what it is. It just sidetracks you, or it kind of just throws you off the trail that you thought you were going.
Right.
But, like I said, I love it for what it is. The story is strong. It's a nice kind of like what if type of deal. Um, there's plentiful of side stuff to do. And weird enough, I just found it more engaging to get into all this side content because everything like connects together in a way. So when you complete one thing, you feel like you opened up something else to get it. So you feel constantly accomplished uh, going through it. So it was kind of like it really was a Muso meets Breath of the Wild in many ways because they're always wanting to do something else like right after. Like I didn't feel bored going through the combat.
Right. And that's another one of those games where I didn't wanna put it down. I was playing in handheld, I was playing on the TV, I was playing it I just put, I think, maybe 25 hours into it. I just kept playing. I ignored my children. They're not eating, they're starving, they're fed.
Jeez.
Life just stopped. I was just playing this game. I was having so much fun. There are so many playable characters I was not expecting to play as.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it they do throw you off the scent. Like, if you come at this like, "Alright, I already know the story. I played Breath of the Wild. I know what's gonna happen." It's just don't expect it. I mean, they kinda guide you a little bit, but there's just so many different things, to, again, throw you off the scent. But my children are doing fine, so don't worry about them, okay?
Well, it's good they're eating. You know,
Yes.
we got to hit that bear, that baseline there. Very
I
cool.
think I think they're around. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't played that game. I was tempted to pick it up, but I don't know. There was something about it. It's not like it's not what I was looking for with
Being
a,
a Breath of the Wild fan, I think is required to enjoy this.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
can see that.
required to enjoy it.
Yes, it
Or,
is very much a fan service game
oh,
for
okay.
Breath of the Wild.
Okay.
Like Hyrule Warriors was a like a fan service for the Zelda series in general. This one here is specifically like for Breath of the Wild. So if there's elements that you loved in that game, like they fan service it like over the top in this one.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it fan service. It's just based off of Breath of the Wild, you know? Um, I don't know. I wouldn't call it fan service, but I will say that the original Hyrule Warriors definitely was a fan service to Zelda games because it had, like, Zelda characters from so many different kinds of games, where this
I
was
don't
just
know, man.
But
You
but
look at
it
that
tells
character roster.
it,
Uh,
yeah,
but
yeah, I guess you could say that character roster maybe is a little fan service, but if you're at all on the fence about this, I think the demo is still up on the eShop, so I mean, it's
yeah,
available for taking.
it's supposed to tell the story of like a prequel to Breath of the Wild, though, correct?
yes, this is set 100 years before.
So, and I think that like what I was hoping for, what I really want to play is like another Breath of the Wild game. And I think like the combat itself and everything was just too much of a departure for me personally,
Yeah,
but I haven't played it. So maybe I
it's
should
just
check it out now.
that's the thing, it's just you can't go in expecting that. It tells you the Breath of the Wild story that you wanna hear, just obviously not the combat, not the open world, not the sandbox that you wanna play in, so it's just different.
All the things I like.
Yeah, download the demo if you feel hesitant. That's right. It gives you the whole first mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to try it out. Big fan. Um, Very cool. So Stan, you said your runner up was a 7 remake, and then
Yes.
Eric, your runner up was
Paper Mario: The Origami King.
you SOB. Go. All right, go ahead.
It was a very fun game. It was one of those like comfort one of those comfort games.
Okay.
I like it's a very good game and I highly recommend it. I think it's definitely one of the best Paper Marios ever made, especially coming from games like Sticker Star and Color Splash, which were not good to okay to going back to a lot of uh, like a lot better game is a better way to put it. Like they still don't have the stronger RPG elements of the first two games, but they get away with a lot of good stuff in this one. The RPG elements are still there, but it doesn't progress in the way that you think they do. So what it doesn't get the top spot for me is that it's more of a comfort game, but it's not an out of this world experience for me or anything. I do feel like FF7 Remake is at least a strong experience for me in comparison, and like Paper Mario is more like comfort food.
Hmm.
But it was still a good title for what it was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
all right, I just have a real problem with calling this one an RPG. I think you and I just have different just choices.
Touche.
I don't see the character progression, the player progression in this. It's a massive departure from even Thousand Year Door, which is the true Paper Mario RPG, way over Color Splash and Sticker Star. I mean, I'd like to forget those even exist, but I don't even. I just don't see it. I mean, I played it. I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. I did enjoy the game. I just don't know if there's enough there to for me to call it an RPG. But
I don't think you necessarily need stats or levels to necessarily have strong RPG elements. If you play especially the boss fights in Paper Mario, there's a lot of strategy and elements involved in the gameplay, and having strong strategy in your combat, I think, is another thing that makes an RPG really good. Paper Mario does give this for every single battle. Its downside is in the normal battles that you only get coins for your runs, but and coins are definitely a plenty in this game. They should have done more stronger incentive to engage enemies, but getting away from enemies is a little hard to begin with in that game. So um, that is what it is. But the especially the boss fights against like the tape and the um, scissors and the fights like that, they're so fun and engaging, and you really have to think outside the box how you're going to perfectly formulate the circles or the map out to get Mario to that point. So the amount of strategy in the game needed, I think, creates a strong RPG focus on it. And of course, the story is an RPG format in itself.
Right. So I've got a question for Gio and a question for Eric on this then. I also played the game. I enjoyed it for what it was. Was not my game of the year, but it was okay. Gio, so Paper Mario, the Origami King, what genre would you classify this game in if you had to pick?
it's an action adventure game with
Is
light
that
art.
turn-based action adventure?
Yeah, I think what when I say character progression or player progression, I don't
Yeah,
mean
I know
that.
what you mean. I mean like
I don't mean that in terms of
tabletop style.
yeah, I don't mean that in terms of levels. I mean as actual growth in a character. Okay, your character is really getting stronger, or your character is I don't know, that sort of stuff. I think with Paper Mario is you just okay, you got a card and it's stronger. It's just not enough there for me.
Mm,
And I think with I don't wanna go into the what is an RPG discussion because that can go on forever. I
Yeah.
just put more of an emphasis on player and character progression, um, over other things. I think that's different for everybody. What someone else emphasizes more of it or as an RPG. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. I
Absolutely, because like I don't think you're wrong at all for what you say. Because like you just said, people have different things they look for when they look for in an RPG. And if you don't have that feeling, that personal feeling of character stat progression, it can feel off to you in the RPG. I can definitely understand that, and I would agree with you on that. I think the one thing with though is Paper Mario, they kind of look at progression and character through exploration. They so the hearts that you gain in the game are mostly found through going around and exploring the area as most as you can. And I think that's where they show the character progression for that, and that you naturally fight enemies that are in the way and stuff like that. I do feel like at the end of the day, you do get that progression, but it's in a different way.
Mhm.
But I do agree, it's not like a very straightforward thing. It is something you kind of have to think outside the box to justify it, but it doesn't have that straight character progression that games in the past have.
It's
And
it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one last thing. I will also say the co-host on my podcast feels it is an RPG, so we have this discussion and argument all the time. So
Awesome.
and
Yeah.
it's over other games as well, but this one's always a common one.
Here's the thing.
Mm.
I think that this game, Paper Mario Origami King, is kind of it's in a gray area, and it's difficult to classify. But I think it depends on who you're talking to, and like this type of format where we're having weekly video game discussions. My parameters for what is an RPG is much more stricter than it is when I talk to my cousin who plays one game a year.
Sure.
And she got into her first video game ever was Skyrim, and she loved Skyrim, right? And then she went on and played Fallout. So I was trying to get her to play Horizon Zero Dawn, and her question to me was, is it an RPG? In this discussion, I would say no, but to her, I was like, yeah, because I know what she means, right?
Sure.
She can I run from city to city? Can I, like choose dialogue options and stuff like that? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And I think that to a lot of people, Paper Mario Origami King kind of falls in that similar boat where, okay, technically, like it doesn't really have the same mechanics as a traditional RPG, but to a lot of people, it's got turn-based combat, and that feels a lot like Pokemon, right? And they played that as a kid, and that was an RPG. So I guess in a sense, it feels like one. But Eric, I'm curious why the Origami King you would classify easily as an RPG, but something like Hades is not. Where's the?
A lot
And
of
I guess I don't want to jump at that conversation we're talking about, but just with the games that we're talking about.
the RPG feels like a subset to the action, which
Okay.
isn't.
I was just trying to hone in on that.
Hades' strategy is involved a lot in skill. Being able to dodge, knowing when to dodge, knowing when to come back and strike. Its action elements heavily outweigh the RPG side of the mechanics. The RPG side of it is more in the preparation for it and the interaction with characters there more than the actual gameplay itself. So I can definitely say Hades has RPG elements of that nature, but I don't find those RPG elements strong enough that it's heavily incorporated into the gameplay.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's there to help the action gameplay more than if that's a I don't know if that's the best way to say it.
Okay. I was just curious because I thought it was an interesting point you were making.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying. We all weigh different things, and again, what he's saying is that the personal growth or the character progression, he just doesn't weigh heavily in that instance. So he thinks that the game is more focused on combat rather than I'm guessing the RPG elements or the character growth or progression in that game anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
like you will probably never convince me to call Zelda an RPG.
Well, Zelda 2 is an RPG.
Zelda 2, yeah.
I think the general consensus is yes, Zelda 2 is definitely RPG. Everything else is that gray area.
I would still say Zelda 2 is an action game with RPG elements.
I don't I failed in my life.
Yeah. Well, this is a fun discussion, but let's keep going here, guys. So, I think now that we've narrowed this down to what Zelda is and Zelda is not. Cool. Very cool.
All right, Hat.
So we got some. I was trying to get past like saying it. What my runner up was. I was trying to just kind of like skip over it.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, it was the 7 remake.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Anyways, I've already talked enough about that game. It was just the nostalgic moments were good enough that I really enjoyed those moments. But the things that I talked about, I just could not push it over Cyberpunk for me. So, but there were some other notable RPGs that came out this year. Many of them I played, some of them I didn't. Let's quickly go over these. If there's anything that you guys want to talk about on these, probably won't be able to go as in depth as we just did. But Persona 5 Royal, that came out this year. A lot of people really liked that game. That I've never played Persona 5 Royal or 5 before, but I played Royal and I liked it a lot. I did not like Persona 4. So I was not expecting to like Persona 5 Royal, but it's just, I think it's a better game. So the story's engaging from the get-go. Its pacing's a little bit better. Dialogue's great for a JRPG style. The UI is fantastic. So music's great. So really like it. But I could not pick that game because it's the same game that came out in 2017.
Yeah,
So,
Right.
Yeah, I tried to not pick even though mine's literally called Final Fantasy VII Remake.
yeah, but that's really like remade from the ground up, and like
it's
this
more
is the same game with like they added a lot, but it's different.
Yeah, I thought it was justified more than enough to be on the list. But I tried to not do a remaster, at least. Even though Xenoblade is a
It is a remake.
really good remaster.
It's the same game.
Well, but they
slight
Okay, anyways. Yeah, we get it. Like there's different preferences here. But yeah, so that's kind of the logic we're picking with some of this. Trials of Mana that came out this year as well.
Oh, that was good too.
Yeah,
it was good. The music was not so good. I think when they redid the music, it just it was okay.
Voice acting was terrible for me. I just couldn't.
Are you telling me the voice acting wasn't really good?
In Shawit.
I was just like, dude,
Yeah, her
I
voice
want
was
to turn this off.
But the game was pretty good though. I will say that.
I enjoyed it. It was just the story wasn't. It was very generic.
It depends on who you chose for your characters, though.
Yeah, I chose. Shoot, who did I choose? Who did you choose? What would you recommend?
I chose the wolf dude. I forget his name. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But
Kevin.
Kevin
Was. Yeah.
Okay.
I picked the warrior, Angela, and the thief guy.
Duran,
I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I picked she was like the princess that was forbidden or whatever. She didn't have magic abilities in the beginning. I liked it, but I didn't think it was like it was good. It wasn't amazing, but it was good. Yeah. So I enjoyed the game, but it just wasn't like the whole year. That's what I'm trying to get across.
I think the story is serviceable enough to motivate you to go through the game.
I prefer this version over the original, so that speaks a lot.
I do too.
I played that one, and that was one that this year that just didn't really click for me. It never did. I played through it, and like I wasn't having a terrible time with the game, but the combat to me just felt like I was doing the same thing over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was very kind of button mashy, kind of grindy for me. Like I didn't feel like my characters never got any combat options that was like, oh, now I play this character differently. It was like, no, they use a spell, it does damage, or I could just attack the enemy to do damage. You know, I can buff myself, now I do more damage.
Yeah.
So kind of from like it does open up a little bit like in the very beginning, but kind of from like the 10-hour mark to the end, I was just playing the same way for the next 20 hours.
Yeah. Right.
And so for me, that was kind of just like, I'm just going to different locations, but doing the same thing every time.
It felt like I had played this. Well, I had played this game before, but it felt like I had played a different a similar game to this before, and it was good and well executed, but I didn't get a lot of crazy enjoyment out of it. It was just kind of like a time killer for me. Kind of like how Eric was talking about Paper Mario Origami King, where it was just kind of like a feel good game, but not anything that.
It's comfort food.
Right. Right.
And I do understand the repetition of it, but I think it had that satisfying arcade like hack and slash to it that I enjoyed it regardless.
Yeah, it was fun.
Similar to Yeast 8, I'm actually playing right now.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So
on sale, so I got
not to go into a like too much of a tangent, but that game I think actually does a better job of making you switch characters, and it's like feels more a part of the strategy. Whereas in Trials of Mana, I felt like the characters, for the most part, other than like a few spell options, they all play the same. Like their button combos are all the same. Like if you push like light attack, strong attack, that's a combo no matter what character you pick, and it does the same thing every time. You know.
Yeah, I usually just switch the characters when I want to do their special.
Yeah.
Or if I like do healing duty, and the AI is not enough.
Well, I had a problem with the AI. The AI wasn't just wasn't good enough. They were constantly like I had to micromanage a lot.
And Trials of Mana, or you say?
In Trials of Mana.
Gotcha. Another game that came out this year, kind of. I was tempted to pick this game, but Crosscode came out on console. Yeah. So it's one of those games that has been out kind of sort of for like several years on PC, but they've been just updating it, and it wasn't the official release until this year. So I had already played it on PC, and then I played it on Switch, and I'm still waiting on my PS4 version. That like I got the collector's edition. It was supposed to come in August.
It just shipped. Mine just shipped. I got the version, the collector's edition.
Did it arrive yet, or?
Oh no, it's like coming from like Europe, so it's going to be here. It's going to be a while.
Yeah, I'm so glad I didn't wait for it, because I went ahead and got the PS4 version, the collector's edition, and then I bought it on Switch, so that way I could still play it. But yeah, I really like that game a lot. It's just I couldn't pick it because I had already played it on PC like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
and it was just. And plus, I don't even know if then it would be able to eclipse 7 Remake or Cyberpunk for me, just because as good as the music is, as good as like the pixel art is, and the combat's fun, it's just the story was very fun, but it kind of dipped a little bit towards the center, and I got a little fatigued with it. It picked back up, but I don't know. It just didn't quite hit it there for me.
Combat in that game is really satisfying.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, very good game. Highly recommend it.
I can't wait to play it when it comes in eventually.
It's really good. One of my favorite art styles for sure. Another game that made a big splash this year, Genshin Impact.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that game came out this year.
That was a game?
Yeah, it was dude, it was on one of the contenders for game of the year. I don't know. I liked Genshin Impact. I had a good time with it. I enjoyed a lot of it. It's just, I have a hard time with a game where it doesn't have an end. Right?
Yeah.
And that didn't like
MMOs, really.
Yeah. That's I have a problem for the same reason with MMOs, but more in particular this one, because I don't feel like there is an end. It's just like they're going to keep this going as long as possible. And so when I'm playing it, I'm like, I'm enjoying it, but I'm not sure I'm really in it for like the 12-year hike until this thing's resolved.
Well, I think if they treat it like an MMO, kind of have your big expansion. All right, this is the scenario now, and you tackle that, you complete that. All right, now it's kind of the downtime. All right, now it's another big expansion or scenario. I think that's their plan anyway. I did an interview.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah,
interview with them at PAX, and we didn't record that part of it, but he did mention that. Yeah, that's their plan, is to kind of have world events, kind of big expansions, that sort of stuff. And it is eventually going to come to the Switch. I'm not sure when, but hopefully soon.
They did release like a big map update. I remember like just before Christmas time, I didn't jump back into the game to try it out, just because I got kind of fatigued with it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time you put into it, Hat, but
I put
I
about
was like,
30 hours or so.
okay,
So,
yeah, I was about the same, maybe a little bit more. But
Yeah.
it came to the point where I was logging on just to do like daily quests.
Yeah.
Because to progress your character, well, there's all kinds of different things that you need to progress your character and level up your characters, level up your weapons, level up your accessories. But to do that, you kind of have to be playing the game consistently, and it just became kind of a task. Like, oh, I'm off of work now. I need to log on to Genshin Impact for an hour and a half to complete all my daily tasks.
yeah.
And it just became like a repetitive thing that eventually it was just like, I kind of want that hour and a half of my evening back every day, and so I dropped the game.
Just log in on your phone.
Oh yeah.
It's just with me. I don't think I'm a big fan of the aesthetic.
Kind of anime Breath of the Wild looking thing.
It was kind of
Yeah.
Tales meets Breath of the Wild. Yeah. I liked it a lot. I don't have any problems with it. I mean, I see people getting upset about it, but hey, I got 30 hours out of it and I didn't pay a penny.
There you
So
go.
I thought that was great. And
Yeah.
I just didn't want to stick with it because there wasn't really an end to it. And I saw people were like doing insane dungeon grinds every day to try to, polish off what was left until the next patch came out or the next expansion. And
Yeah.
that ain't me. That ain't me.
That seemed like a game where they highly depend on the whales to get invested into their game.
Yeah.
Because I've had some friends that got so invested into the end game, like the amount of grinding and this is only from what I've heard, and money you have to spend to make at least one character the ultimate like tier of that character and their weapons and equipment and stuff costs way more than it's worth.
I do see people that say they haven't spent anything and are getting that, but they're doing, like Stan said, like 2 hours every night for the last 5 months. And they're enjoying it too. So it's not, that's cool. So especially in this year to have something free to play, you don't have to spend, well, I mean, they're wanting you to spend money, but you can play it without that. That's pretty cool.
I will say, though, the game is very high quality for what it is. I was very surprised. I thought it was going to some areas where we're going to feel cheapened out, but it definitely felt like there was effort put into making the game. It is a knockoff of a lot of familiar games, but I think they still mesh it together well enough and find a way to create its identity ultimately out of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a insult to anything by any means.
Well said.
Yeah.
Another game that came out this year was Baldur's Gate 3, which I ended up not picking up. So
I did.
I thought that game was still in early access.
It is in early access. Yeah.
Okay. So this didn't. I don't know why it didn't grab me. I played the first two when I was a kid, but it's been too long, and I'm just don't.
Yeah.
I forgot major parts of the story, and it's just So
I think I'll have to go through the first two before I ever decide to pick up the third game.
Good luck.
Hey, I on my phone.
There you go.
So 13 Sentinels Agus Rim. I see a lot of people pointing this out as an RPG. I actually was able to play this a couple weeks before it came out because I was recording footage for RPG Fan. And I liked it a lot. I liked the story. I liked the setting. I liked many aspects about it. The music, the story in particular really impressed me. It was really good with all the different character narratives, but the pacing of it was so slow from what I'm used to. It reminded me of Persona 4, where it would just feel like it would take hours just to like progress like an inch with the plot.
Oh.
So that's kind of why I couldn't rate it up there. And plus the gameplay part was not, there wasn't a lot of gameplay in it. It's basically a visual novel, but it does do things like in the story sequences, it'll say, hey, look for clues. And you'll walk around the room looking for clues. And then it'll go back to like the just visual novel type thing. And there is like a mech battle thing that you can do every now and again. That's like a dream sequence, but it's very removed from the main narrative in a way that I didn't expect. It's not like a traditional RPG where you can just run off into towns and stuff. It's very guided. So it was good. I think of that style of game, it was probably one of the best that I could probably actually play and be accessible to me, because I've tried visual novels before and it's just not my thing. And this one I actually enjoyed. So kudos to that, but not quite there for Game of the Year for me.
I have not tried that one, but I know somebody who wants to play it, so
Yeah,
I might end up.
It's a fun game. It's a fun game to
bit.
watch. Yakuza Like a Dragon that came out this year. I did not play that, but I've heard lots of people really like it.
I want to get that. I
You
do
do?
want it. Yeah.
You want it?
Yeah.
I really want to get back into the Yakuza series. I played the first 3 and I enjoyed the first 3, but now I feel a little intimidated jumping in, doing 4, 5, and 6, and then Like a Dragon, and then they got these spin-offs and Yakuza 0 and stuff like that. I was like, man, I feel like I've gotten way behind.
Yeah.
But I feel like if my backlog just gets clear enough, that I might convince myself to just marathon run the Yakuza games. Because I hear Like a Dragon is actually from what I hear from other people, that it's a really good departure from the series.
What interests me about it is that the main character, from what I understand, I haven't played it, is like 40 years old. And like, I don't know, I think like a kind of like a Japanese style. What's that?
Does that resonate with you? He's a 40-year-old man.
Well, it's just like, I like the fact that like he's older and it's like Japanese and not like the 13-year-old greatest detective in the land JRPG that we so often get. It's just like, I just like the fact that like it's different.
I just want a guy who just like sits out on his couch, eats pizza all day.
I don't want an actual 40-year-old.
Oh, sorry. I just described my life. My apologies.
Just like I don't want like an actual kid in the JRPG. So
wants a 40-year-old hero protagonist, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hey, Gio, you've played through the series?
No. I just want to jump right into it. I honestly, from what I heard is that this is kind of an okay part to jump into, where it's almost not quite a spin-off, but I didn't think you needed to understand the whole Yakuza timeline. I could be wrong.
I've heard the same thing. You can jump right in.
I do wonder at the point if fans of the series are going to prefer to keep the turn-based elements or want to return to like the action brawler type play it had before. I'll be interested to see how the crowd and the developers react to this game.
But that's what interests me in this one, is that it is turn-based.
And people appear to like it. So that's pretty cool that that they had that, and it's a modern game. People seem to enjoy it. So the only other big RPG that came out this year, besides the Trails in the Sky games that I have not played, so I'm not even going to try to talk about. But the Demon Souls that came out this year for PS5, just a remake. So I haven't played it. I don't have a PS5, so that's kind of a limitation.
Yeah,
so.
It is a limitation. One game I don't know if you're going to not discuss it, but bring it up is Immortal. Phoenix Rising.
Yeah, I forgot about that game. That was a game that I was actually kind of piqued my interest. I almost bought it over the holidays, but
which
I just played more Cyberpunk.
It was Immortal Phoenix Rising.
Oh, yeah. I got that. There you go.
Yeah. Bingo.
Nice.
Yeah. Good game. Really like it.
Yeah.
I heard these.
If you like Breath of the Wild, this kind of just falls right in line, right?
Yeah, and the narrative is very humorous. Like listening to Zeus talk in the narration while you're running around is pretty gold. I thought I'd be annoyed with it, but he has a lot of humorous things to say. Like I forgot what the other god name is he's talking to during it. Prometheus or something like that. Could be wrong. he's telling the story and like Zeus is like reacting to it. So there's like funny parts in it where like there's a Cyclops about to attack your main character, and him and the are arguing if he's like a little Cyclops or he's a really big Cyclops, and your main character is just sitting like kind of worried, like which one they're gonna pick.
And the actual enemy changes on screen. Like they're talking about, all right, it's a big Cyclops. No, it's a small one, and you're just watching the enemy on screen change as they're talking about it. There are little funny things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got good, strong exploration elements. I think it misses the mark in some aspects. Like I don't feel like there's that you just walk around and you find something type of deal. I feel like you need to get on that statue and find everything you can on there, then go to them. But the exploration factor in the game is still very strong. And their version of the shrines are pretty engaging also.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I think that attracted to me was the art style and just the fact that it doesn't take itself seriously. That's what I hear people talk about, that it's just kind of like this fun, goofy adventure, and that just sounded like something that would be enjoyable this year. So
It's very goofy, and it definitely parodies.
honestly, I might need something like that after so much time in Cyberpunk, with just like how unsettling everything is. Just having a fun adventure like that might be just what I need.
It's
Nope.
very but definitely play the PS4 or PC version,
Okay.
because
The Switch versions.
the Switch version does run well, but they took a significant amount of compromises to make it work well on the Switch.
Yeah. Yeah, a
So,
game like that I wouldn't play on Switch, but
yeah, graphically it looks much better on those. But if you really
Okay.
rather play it on a handheld, it's perfectly good on Switch also. But they downgraded the graphics.
And I will
significantly.
in true Ubisoft fashion, the game is like already on sale. Like you can get it for half off.
Oh yeah.
Like 2 weeks after the release, it's already $30.
Is there? Yeah, I know that they do the same thing with a lot of their games. I stopped buying a Ubisoft game on launch because it's like, yeah, it's going to be half off in a month or two.
Yeah.
Like every time.
That's fantastic. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
All right. So was there any other RPGs that came out that were, I know there was lots of RPGs that came out this year, but like big ones that you all thought would be notable that we didn't mention here? Those were the ones I could think of, and from what I saw online.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned before Ghost of Tsushima, but you said that that's kind of in
If
the
we
gray
put Ghost
area.
of Tsushima into the mix as an RPG, that would have probably swapped with 7 Remake.
Did you
Okay,
consider Animal Crossing an RPG?
No, okay.
No,
Eric.
it's like a social sim kind of game.
Yeah.
Closer to The Sims than
Yeah.
like in a traditional RPG.
Okay.
And then there was Avengers that has a Diablo like loot system, but I
Well,
don't
we're
think
talking
Nah.
about good games.
There
Fair
are a
enough.
couple Diablo likes. You got Minecraft Dungeons and Darksiders Genesis is another
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Darksiders Genesis is pretty good.
Yeah, Minecraft Dungeons is your quintessential Diablo, like with the kind of randomized loot sort of stuff. But Darksiders Genesis, I had a really good time with that too.
Oh, guys, we got to change everything. God, I was just looking at it now.
We gotta
No,
wrap this up here shortly.
actual RPG of the year, looking through here now, was The Last of Us Part 2.
It's not an RPG.
I feel like we're going off the rails, guys.
You see the award show, it won like every category.
That's true. That's true. It did win almost every category except
Nothing to do with Jeff Keighley and Sony and any of that stuff.
no.
I-
No.
I played that game. It is a very well made game. I'm on the side of people who had issues. So, but that's not an RPG, so there's no need to really go into the details on that.
That's not. It's where
RPG of the year.
that's your RPG of the year. All right. Well, we'll make sure to clip that out as your favorite RPG of 2020 with your face in the thumbnail. And
Did I do a good job?
anyways, all right. So I think that's it. I think we've covered a lot of different RPGs that came out this year. We've got a good range of games. I do think the ones that we've picked have been kind of the bigger splashes, and definitely all good picks. But we asked on our Discord server too, what were some of the games that people picked. There was a lot. There was some discussion about Hades. There was a lot of 7 Remake for sure. I know that a few people said Persona 5 Royal. They really like that. So, but I saw one trooper out there picked Cyberpunk. Clearly
All right.
has the best
Nice.
opinion. So I'm not solo out there. But anyways, so
Dummy account.
yeah, that was my spare account. I just
Yeah, I wouldn't say 2020 had any RPGs that completely blew my mind.
Yeah.
But,
in a good way. Yeah.
yeah, but it was a pretty moderate year for decent RPGs. I'm just hoping 2021 hits harder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't wait until the PS5 version of Cyberpunk comes out so I can pick that again next year. So,
boo.
anyways.
I want another Undertale game
Yeah.
where it's like, what did I just play? This just changed my life.
Yeah, well, hopefully for 2021. But anyways, I think this year was pretty good. I think there was a better than I expected when I was looking back on it. I had this feeling like it was a sparse year. And then looking back, it actually had some good games that came out. So definitely happy about that. But I think that we are at that point where we're talking about The Last of Us instead of RPGs. I think that's a good indicator that it's probably about time to wrap this thing up. But Gio, really do appreciate you coming on this episode and conversing with us. Again, where do you want people to go to check you out?
Yeah, you can check me out, SwitchRPG.com. You can go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/SwitchRPG. We're on Twitter @SwitchRPG. Yeah, I'm sure you can find us.
Very cool. All right. Well, we'll leave it there and we will catch you all next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you next time.